Imagine a man who, by age 44, has already conquered Gaul, the lands of modern-day France, Belgium, and Switzerland. By 46, he dictates law to the most powerful state in the ancient world. And in between, he reads Greek poetry, writes his own memoirs on the battlefield, and weeps at the grave of his greatest enemy, Gaius Julius Caesar, the man who changed everything. But here's the question that has kept historians arguing for 2,000 years. Was he genuinely saving Rome, or simply using Rome to achieve his own immortality? Today, we break it down together. No glorification, no cheap vileni. Just facts, contradictions, and the uncomfortable truth. Because Caesar deserves neither blind worship nor easy condemnation. He deserves something harder, an honest look, like the world he was born into. To understand Caesar, you first have to understand Rome in the 1st century BC. Because this was not the Rome of peaceful marble columns and philosophical debates. This was a city on the edge of collapse. The Republic, the system of elected magistrates, Senate debates, and shared power that Romans had built over 5 centuries, was rotting from the inside. The gap between the ultra-rich and the desperately poor had become a canyon. Generals were returning from foreign conquests with private armies personally loyal to them, not to the state. Politicians were buying elections openly. Violence in the streets of Rome had become routine. The Republic wasn't murdered by Caesar. It was already dying. Caesar simply decided he would be the one to determine what came next. Born around 100 BC into the Julii, a patrician family of ancient and distinguished lineage, but with very little actual money, Caesar grew up acutely aware of the gap between his name and his circumstances. The Julii claimed descent from Aeneas, the Trojan hero, and through him from the goddess Venus herself. It was a mythological pedigree that Caesar would invoke throughout his entire life, with complete shamelessness and remarkable effectiveness. His father died when Caesar was 15. He became the man of the house at an age when most Roman boys were still studying rhetoric. And from that moment, he was never not calculating. The education of a survivor. His first real test came early, and it nearly killed him. His uncle by marriage was Gaius Marius, one of the greatest military reformers in Roman history, the man who had reorganized the legions and saved Rome from catastrophic invasion. But Marius died in the chaos of political purges, and the man who emerged from the bloodshed in control of Rome was Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a brilliant, ruthless aristocrat who had no patience for the relatives of his enemies. Sulla published prescription lists, essentially government-sanctioned death warrants. Caesar's name appeared on them. He was 19 years old. He survived by fleeing into the countryside, hiding, bribing officials, and eventually negotiating through intermediaries for Sulla's reluctant pardon. When Sulla agreed, he reportedly said of the young man, "In this Caesar, there are many Mariuses." A warning dressed as a compliment. He sensed something in the young man that made him uneasy. Caesar immediately left Rome and went east, officially to study, practically to disappear until the political climate changed. And what happened on the way tells you almost everything about who he already was. His ship was captured by pirates in the Aegean Sea. He was taken hostage. The pirates demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver. Caesar, as a captive, laughed at them. He told them they had underestimated his worth. They should be asking for 50. For the weeks it took his companions to gather the ransom, Caesar lived among the pirates almost as a guest. He wrote poetry and read it aloud to them. When they didn't applaud enthusiastically enough, he called them illiterate barbarians to their faces. He told them, with apparent cheerfulness, that once he was free he would come back and crucify every single one of them. They laughed. They thought he was joking. He was not joking. The moment the ransom was paid and he was released, Caesar organized a small naval force, hunted down the same pirates, captured them, and crucified them. All of them, exactly as he had promised. He was 25 years old. And already, the pattern was clear. Caesar never made a threat he didn't intend to keep. Back in Rome, Caesar threw himself into politics with an energy that exhausted everyone around him. He was famous for working through the night, dictating letters, studying legal cases, writing speeches, while his secretaries took shifts to keep up with him. He was also, by every account, extraordinarily charming. Tall, lean, with sharp eyes and a voice trained by years of studying under the best rhetoricians of the age. He had a memory so precise that he could reportedly call every soldier in his legions by name. He made people feel, when he spoke to them, that they were the most important person in the room. He needed money, enormous amounts of it, to fund the games, banquets, and public works that built his political base among the Roman people. He borrowed so heavily from the financier Crassus that his debts became almost a running joke in Roman society. The joke stopped being funny when Caesar started winning. He won election as Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest, in 63 BC, defeating candidates of far greater age and experience. This was not a religious appointment in any meaningful sense. It was a political office of immense symbolic power, and Caesar campaigned for it like a man who understood that symbolism, in Rome, was everything. On the morning of the election, he kissed his mother goodbye at the door of their house and told her, "Today you will see me come home either as Pontifex Maximus, or not at all." He won. He always seemed to win. 8 years in Gaul. In 59 BC, Caesar secured the consulship, Rome's highest elected office, through a combination of political alliance, strategic bribery, and sheer force of personality. His co-consul spent most of the year hiding at home, claiming to take religious omens, while Caesar passed legislation that his opponents found outrageous and that the Roman poor found miraculous. Then, in 58 BC, Caesar left for Gaul. What followed over the next 8 years was one of the most consequential military campaigns in the history of the ancient world, and one of the most morally complicated. The scale of what Caesar accomplished militarily was staggering. He fought over 50 significant engagements. He built a bridge across the Rhine, in 10 days, simply to demonstrate that Rome could reach the Germanic tribes if it chose to. He crossed to Britain twice, becoming the first Roman commander to set foot on British soil. He suppressed rebellions, negotiated alliances, and unified command over an area larger than modern France with a force that never exceeded about 40,000 men. His account of all of this, Commentarii de Bello Gallico — the Gallic War Commentaries, became one of the most widely read texts in the ancient world, and remains a standard Latin text for students today. It is clean, precise, almost hypnotically readable. It is also, by modern scholarly consensus, a work of sophisticated propaganda. Caesar writes about himself in the third person throughout. Caesar did this. Caesar decided that. Caesar observed. It creates a strange effect. The author seems to be reporting events with cool objectivity, as if Caesar and the narrator are different people. But of course they are the same person. The neutrality is an illusion. Every decision is presented as reasonable, every difficulty as overcome through Caesar's foresight, every enemy as either brave in defeat or treacherous in resistance. What the text does not dwell on, what it passes over in clean, efficient Latin, is the human cost. Plutarch, writing over a century later, estimated that the Gallic Wars killed 1 million people and enslaved another million. Modern historians argue over the exact figures, but no serious scholar disputes that the scale of death and displacement was catastrophic by any standard. The Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix, who united the tribes in a final desperate resistance at the fortress of Alesia in 52 BC, surrendered after a siege of extraordinary brutality, his people starving inside the walls while Roman engineering kept any relief from reaching them. He was taken to Rome, paraded through the streets in Caesar's triumph 6 years later, and then strangled in a prison cell. Caesar does not linger on Vercingetorix's fate in his memoirs. He notes the surrender and moves on. This is the second great paradox of Caesar, the man who wept at Pompey's severed head, who showed mercy to defeated Roman enemies with what seemed like genuine magnanimity, who prided himself on his clementia, his clemency, was the same man who oversaw the systematic destruction of Gaul with a thoroughness that left entire regions depopulated for a generation. The distinction, it seems, was Roman versus non-Roman. The rules of civilization, in Caesar's mind, applied inside a certain circle. Outside that circle, the calculus was different. Hack the die is cast. While Caesar was in Gaul, Rome was descending further into crisis. His political alliance with Pompey and Crassus, the so-called First Triumvirate, had been the foundation of his power. Crassus died in a military disaster in 53 BC. Pompey, feeling threatened by Caesar's rising prestige and now aligned with the conservative Senate faction, began maneuvering against him. The Senate issued an ultimatum in early 49 BC. Caesar must give up his command and return to Rome as a private citizen before standing for the consulship again, or he would be declared a public enemy. Caesar's allies in Rome proposed compromises. The Senate refused them one by one. Caesar understood what this meant. A private citizen could be prosecuted. His enemies had been preparing cases against him for years. To return without his army was to walk into a trap from which he would not emerge. And so on the night of January 10th, or possibly the 11th, ancient sources disagree, Caesar led his 13th legion across the Rubicon River. He reportedly paused on the bank for a long time. He spoke to the officers around him about what this step meant, not just for him, but for Rome, for everything. Then he said, in Greek, a language he used when he wanted to sound philosophical rather than Roman, Anaryptho kubos, let the die be thrown. The Latin version, alii acta est dash, is how history remembers it. What followed was almost anticlimactic in its speed. Pompey had boasted that he needed only to stamp his foot on Italian soil to raise armies in defense of the Republic. He stamped his foot. No armies appeared. He fled south, then crossed to Greece. The Senate fled with him. The treasury fell to Caesar. Caesar entered Rome without a battle. He was careful about how he did it. No looting, no massacres. He paid for everything his army consumed. He released prisoners. He made a point of being visibly, demonstrably merciful. This was not weakness, it was theater, and Caesar understood theater better than anyone alive. Hag, the dictator who worked. The years between 49 and 44 BC were years of almost superhuman activity. Caesar fought a civil war across 3 continents: Spain, Greece, Egypt, North Africa, Spain again. He defeated Pompey at Pharsalus in Greece in 48 BC, a battle that effectively ended the war, though Pompey escaped. When Caesar arrived in Egypt pursuing him, He was presented with Pompey's head as a gift by the Egyptian court. Caesar wept. Whether from genuine grief at the end of his great rival, or from the political calculation that weeping was the appropriate response, no one who was present could say for certain. Perhaps he himself couldn't. In Egypt he met Cleopatra, not the romantic encounter of Hollywood, but a hard political alliance between two of the most calculating minds of the ancient world. She needed his military support to secure her throne. He needed Egypt's grain to feed Rome. They understood each other perfectly. Back in Rome, between military campaigns, Caesar legislated at a pace that left the Senate struggling to keep up. The calendar reform alone was a project of staggering complexity. The old Roman calendar had drifted so far from the actual solar year that the month of October was falling in summer. Caesar commissioned the astronomer Sosigenes of Alexandria to design a new system. The Julian calendar, 365 days, with a leap year every 4 years, was the result. It remained the standard calendar of the Western world for 16 centuries. He redesigned the forum. He began planning a massive new library. He expanded the Senate, controversially, to 900 members, including Gauls from the provinces he had conquered, which the old Roman aristocracy found either visionary or appalling depending on their temperament. He reformed the courts. He regulated the grain supply. He sent surveyors to plan new colonies for the landless poor. And simultaneously, he accumulated titles and honors at a rate that made even his supporters uneasy. Dictator. Then dictator for 10 years. Then dictator perpetuo, dictator in perpetuity, with no end date, no constitutional limit. His statue was placed in the Temple of Quirinus alongside the deified founders of Rome. The month Quintilis was renamed Julius, July. His face appeared on coins while he was still alive, a thing Romans had never done for a living man. He knew how close to the line he was walking. He publicly refused the title of king 3 times. The refusals themselves staged as public theater, performed at the festival of the Lupercalia in February 44 BC, with Mark Antony offering the crown and Caesar pushing it away while the crowd cheered. Whether he genuinely didn't want the title, or understood that the title itself was unnecessary when the reality of monarchy was already his, depends on how cynical you are willing to be about a man who was, by any measure, already king in everything but name. The Ides of March. The conspiracy had been forming for months. 60 men were eventually involved, or at least knew of it. That 60 men could keep a secret in Rome, where political gossip was the city's primary entertainment, tells you something about how broadly the anxiety about Caesar had spread, even among people who had benefited from his patronage. The two central figures were Gaius Cassius Longinus and Marcus Junius Brutus. Cassius was a practical man with genuine political grievances. He had expected more from Caesar's favor than he received. Brutus was something more complicated. He was a stoic philosopher and man of principle who genuinely believed he was acting for the Republic. He was also, in some accounts, a man Caesar had particularly favored. Some ancient sources even suggest Caesar may have believed he was Brutus's biological father, though historians treat this with skepticism. Caesar's wife Calpurnia dreamed of catastrophe the night before the Ides of March and begged him not to go to the Senate. A soothsayer had warned him weeks earlier to beware the Ides of March. His friend Decimus Brutus, one of the conspirators, a man Caesar trusted completely, came to his house that morning and persuaded him that to stay home would look like weakness, like fear. Caesar went. In the vestibule of the Theatre of Pompey, where the Senate was meeting that day, a man pressed a written warning into Caesar's hand. He held it, unread, when he died. He never had a chance to open it. The attack began under the pretense of presenting a petition. As the senators crowded around him, Tullius Cimber grabbed his toga and pulled it from his shoulder, the signal. Publius Servilius Casca struck first, a glancing blow to the neck. Caesar grabbed Casca's arm and drove his stylus into it. Then the rest came in. 23 wounds. The Senate fled screaming. Caesar fell at the base of a statue of Pompey, the man he had defeated in civil war, whose theatre they were meeting in, whose severed head he had wept over. Ancient writers found the symbolism irresistible. Et tu, brute, if he said it at all, he said it in Greek, according to Suetonius. Kai su, teknon, you too, child. The Latin version is Shakespeare's, written 16 centuries later. But the sentiment, whatever the language, is the same. The last thing was recognition. The understanding that the man he may have loved most among the conspirators was there with a blade. He pulled his toga over his face and stopped fighting. Heck, what he left behind. The conspirators had planned for the assassination. They had not planned for what came after. They had assumed that killing Caesar would restore the Republic automatically, that the machinery of democratic governance would simply restart. Like a clock that had been wound wrong and needed only to be reset. They were catastrophically wrong about how Rome actually worked by 44 BC. Mark Antony read Caesar's will at his public funeral. Every Roman citizen received 300 sesterces, real money, from Caesar's personal fortune. Caesar had also left his gardens to the public as a park. The crowd listening to Antony had already been volatile. At this, it became a mob. The conspirators were hunted through the streets. Some were torn apart. The Senate house was burned. A man named Helvius Cinna, a poet, not the conspirator Cornelius Cinna, was murdered by a crowd who confused the names and killed him anyway in their grief and fury. The Republic, the conspirators had killed Caesar to save, died within months anyway. What followed was another civil war, then another, until Caesar's adopted heir Octavian, who would take the title Augustus, finally imposed a settlement on the Roman world in 27 BC. Augustus was careful about titles in a way his adoptive father had not been. He called himself not king, not dictator, but princeps, first citizen. He kept the outward forms of the Republic intact, but the power was absolute, and everyone knew it. The lesson Augustus had learned from Caesar's death was simple. The reality of monarchy is survivable. The name of monarchy is fatal. Caesar had understood this intellectually. He had simply, in the end, moved too fast and accumulated too visibly. 2,000 years of scholarship have not produced a consensus on Julius Caesar, and they are not going to produce one now. He was a man who could inspire extraordinary loyalty. His soldiers adored him, followed him across rivers in winter, built bridges in 10 days, held positions against impossible odds because he was there and he believed they could. He was also a man who used people with a coldness that becomes visible only in retrospect, when you notice how many of his closest allies ended up serving primarily as instruments of his ambition. He was a genuine reformer who identified real problems in Roman society and attacked them with intelligent, lasting solutions. The question that makes him permanently relevant is not whether he was good or evil. It is simpler and harder than that. When a society is broken, and one extraordinary person offers to fix it, at the price of concentrating all power in their hands, what do you do? What should you do? Rome said yes to Caesar. The Republic ended. The Empire began. And for a very long time, by most measures, Romans were more prosperous, more secure, and better governed than they had been in the chaotic final decades of the Republic. Was the price worth it? Rome thought so. History has argued about it ever since. Caesar died on the 15th of March, 44 BC. The month of July carries his name. Kaiser, Tsar, Tsar, the titles of European monarchs for 2,000 years, all descend from his family name. Shakespeare gave him some of the most famous lines in the English language. Dante placed his assassins in the frozen lowest circle of hell, beside Judas Iscariot, because in Dante's moral universe, betraying your lord was the worst sin imaginable, and Caesar was lord of the world. 2,000 years later, we are still arguing about him. That, perhaps, is the most Caesar thing of all.